I am pleased now to introduce the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden. Mr. Biden, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you all at the APIA vote. You're all talking about voting for this organization as an opportunity for us to be together. I also want to thank Congressman Chu for her incredible leadership in the House of Representatives and for her commitment to keeping the issues that matter to members of the Asian American Pacific Islander community top of the mind for all of us. And I'd like to start today by briefly addressing what I consider to be a horrifying revelation in the New York Times last night. Assuming the Times report is accurate, the U.S. intelligence community has assessed that a Russian military intelligence unit, the same unit that was behind the assassination of the former KGB agent in London 5 years ago, has been offering bounties to extremist groups in Afghanistan to kill U.S. troops. There is no bottom to the depth of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin's depravity. If that's true, it's truly shocking revelation that if the Times report is true, I emphasize again, is that President Trump, the commander-in-chief of American troops serving in a dangerous theater of war, has known about this for months, according to the Times, and done worse than nothing. Not only has he failed to sanction or impose any kind of consequences on Russia for this egregious violation of international law, Donald Trump has continued his embarrassing campaign of deference and debasing himself before Vladimir Putin. He has this information, according to the Times, and yet he offered to host Putin in the United States and sought to invite Russia to rejoin the G7. His entire presidency has been a gift to Putin, but this is beyond the pale. It's a betrayal of the most sacred duty we bear as a nation, to protect and equip our troops when we send them into harm's way. And it's a betrayal of every single American family with a loved one serving in Afghanistan or anywhere overseas. And I'm quite frankly outraged by the report. And if I'm elected president, make no mistake about it, Vladimir Putin will be confronted and will impose serious cost on Russia. But I don't just think about this as a candidate for president. I think about this as a dad, a father, who sent his son to serve in harm's way for a year in the Middle East and in Iraq. And I'm disgusted on behalf of those families whose loved ones are serving today. When your child volunteers to serve, they're putting their life on the line for the country. They take risks, known and unknown, for this nation. But they should never, ever face a threat like this with their commander-in-chief turning a blind eye to a foreign power, putting a bounty on their heads. And if I'm president, this and so many other abuses will not stand. No, this is a difficult time for our country. More than 125,000 people have died because of COVID-19, with millions more infected. More than 20 million Americans are still out of work. And all of us are contending with how we can ensure a strong reopening of our economy and the many AAPI-owned small businesses across the country without endangering the safety and health of ourselves, our families, and workers across America. At the same time, during the pandemic, Donald Trump is telling his administration to, quote, slow down testing, ending federal funding for test sites. I understand he just reversed that today. He was going to end funding for federal test sites, but Republican governors said, don't do it. He changed his mind. Fighting in court to strip people of their health care under the Affordable Care Act. And on top of all of this, Asian Americans are being targeted with violence and subjected to xenophobia rhetoric from the mouth of the president himself. This is a president who, instead of bringing our country together, does everything he can to fan the flames of hate and division in this country. From the moment I launched this campaign, I've been speaking about the battle for the soul of our nation. This is part of that battle. And in this moment of national and global crisis, where the racial inequities that plague our society are even more evident now than they've been. At this time, we need a president who can address every aspect of this pandemic with urgency and seriousness, including anti-AAPI bias. You know, Donald Trump only knows how to speak to people's fears not to the better angels. He only ever speaks to place blame instead of claiming responsibility. But that's not who we are. We're so much better than this president can even conceive of us being. Just look at how the AAPI community and so many others across this nation have responded to Trump's racist attacks during the pandemic. By stepping up, doctors, nurses, researchers, frontline healthcare workers, grocery clerks, delivery drivers, restaurant owners. They're showing the best of America every single day, standing in a breach, filling in for Donald Trump's complete lack of leadership when it comes to keeping Americans safe during this pandemic. Our AAPI community is essential, period. Not just as essential workers, but essential to the very fabric of this nation. The AAPI community is essential to our American story. And I'm also here today asking for your support because this isn't just a moment of crisis. It's an incredible opportunity to build our country back, build it back better, even stronger than it was before. You know, I think the American people have had the blinders ripped off in so many ways. We're ready to take on the deep systemic inequities that have plagued our society for much too long. I think we're ready to deliver some real, fundamental, long overdue changes. I think we're ready to celebrate the incredible strengths that we draw from our diversity, from harnessing everyone's unique talents. And I'm looking forward to working with the AAPI community to deliver the progress we need for all Americans. That's what we did in the Obama-Biden administration. President Obama and I fought to expand opportunity and open the doors to more Americans, including fighting for AAPI communities. We established the White House Initiative on Asian American and Pacific Islanders. We helped 2 million AAPI individuals gain health care coverage through the Affordable Care Act. We protected thousands of Asian Pacific American dreamers by creating and expanding the DACA program. We strengthened the crimes protection for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We worked to disaggregate federal data to better meet the challenges facing the AAPI community. We secured long overdue compensation for proud Filipino veterans of World War II. And we appointed more AAPI judges to the bench than every administration in U.S. history combined. And as president, I'll build on this legacy and continue to fight for AAPI rights. I'll make sure your voices and your interests are included, from our courtrooms to the president's cabinet. My administration will look like America. We'll work together to ensure that the most sacred aspect of our democracy, the right to vote, is protected and accessible for all people. There's so much we can do. And it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take leadership at the highest levels of our government and sustained grassroots pressure, which you all provide. Nothing about this is going to be easy or automatic, but I believe we can do it together. So thank you again for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And again, thank you very much for your activism.
Vice President Biden, thank you so much for those remarks, sir, and for being here and taking the time to answer our questions. I want to begin with one of my own, if you don't mind. You mentioned some of those systemic issues, the inequalities we're still addressing as a nation over time. And I'd like to ask you about some questions you faced about your team. During the last election cycle, Democratic candidates released staff diversity data on a regular basis, almost quarterly. You haven't released yours yet. Your senior-most advisors, it's been reported, are predominantly white. There's very few Black and Latino senior advisors. My understanding is no Asian American senior advisors. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But when we look at dismantling systemic racism in America, political institutions like campaigns are often among the worst offenders. So what do you now say to the voters of color who worry that if you can't lead the way on fixing this on your own team right now, then maybe you can't lead the way on fixing it in the rest of the country? And a related question, when will you release that staff diversity data? Mr. Biden.
I'll release that staff diversity data today. When we get off this call, we'll call you. You know, the fact of the matter is we have a very diverse staff. And we have a diverse staff that goes across the board and high level and senior positions. So I will make sure we release it to you, and it does include AAPI members, as well as a significant number of African Americans, significant number of women, and Latinos.
Sir, just to clarify, when you say that, we are talking about the senior-most members of your staff, not staff overall, the people with agency who are at the decision-making table.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wonderful.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I will take that call when I get it from your team.
All right. My team has to be watching this. When this is over, pick up the phone immediately and call her. Okay?
Thank you for that, sir. Let's turn now to some community questions. I know we have a lot to get through.
By the way, one other thing.
Yeah.
My administration is going to look like America. Not just my staff, the administration. From the vice president, straight down through cabinet members, to major players within the White House and the court. It's going to be a reflection of who we are as a nation.
Okay, let's turn now to those community questions, sir. I want to bring in now, joining us on Zoom, John Vang Tao. He's a community organizer in Minnesota. Here's the thing to know about him, Vice President Biden. He is, as I mentioned, a community organizer. He was previously incarcerated for 8 years. He now works for a regional government agency. I believe he joins us now, and I'm going to hand it over to him to ask his question directly to you.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you. Last month, Minnesota and our nation was traumatized by the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed. As we all are looking for a new way forward, we must acknowledge that these events are a result of the inequities within our systems. Past policies like tough on crime legislation has led to the over-policing of poor communities, including immigrant communities, and introducing them into the school-to-prison pipeline. Many people like me who have finished paying our debt to society, we often struggle to rebuild our lives and overcome systemic barriers after prison. Some have been able to find jobs, and others have been left with no other options but to start a new business. Many of us have started families and became upstanding members in the community. Despite all of these accomplishments, ICE has been deporting people like us since 2002. These actions are destroying families and abandoning good people into countries that many have never stepped foot in. Issues like DACA, immigration, and deportation are all critical to my community. What will you do to ensure that all communities of color, including Southeast Asians and other small ethnic groups, are not left out of your discussions on which immigration reforms and policies to prioritize in your first 100 days? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Please, Vice President Biden, over to you.
By engaging your leadership, as I have through my career, just like we did in our last administration. You know, this pandemic has brought out the best in so many people: doctors, nurses, first responders, grocery clerks, delivery people, caregivers, heroic soldiers in the war against the virus. So many of them are Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. But this crisis has also brought out the worst. We've all heard about the horrible acts against Asian Americans, blamed for the coronavirus, harassment, violence, conspiracy theories, blaming Asian Americans for COVID, dangerous smears, including by Donald Trump. Words matter, and the president's words matter even more. I'm running to restore the soul of this country, to make clear there's no safe harbor here, to stand up to anyone who's been left behind. As president, I'm going to fight every day to lead the change, for significant change in all our policies, and to make sure that every member of the diverse AAPI community is treated with dignity and has a same shot to succeed. And I'm going to make sure the AAPI community is represented in my administration. As I said, under President Obama, we appointed more AAPI judges than every previous administration combined, including 4 times more women of AAPI descent than any other president. We're in an advisory commission on AAPIs, Pacific Island Task Force, and the White House Initiative on AAPIs. We held hundreds of stakeholder meetings and summits and worked with 24 federal agents, the whole community, to make sure they had federal resources. Trump gutted all of that. And as president, I'm going to restart it and take it further. And let me go back to your comment about you having served your time in prison. We have to make a fundamental change in the way we deal with prisons. That's why, in my view, that, and this is what I propose, we should turn, and I've been pushing this for a while now, we should turn our system into one of from punishment to rehabilitation. Once you have served your time, right now what happens is you get $25 in a bus ticket. And a lot of people don't have any place to go except back to right where they were before if they were in real trouble. I believe that you should be entitled to anyone serving their time in prison should be entitled to every single solitary program that exists in the government, from access to housing, to access to food, to access to Pell Grants, to access to educational opportunity. It's overwhelmingly in our interest that we do that. There's much more to talk about in terms of dealing with the whole notion of prison reform. But the biggest reason that we have to do it is to make sure that people have an opportunity to have a new start. The idea that anybody, well, I won't go on. I get too excited about this one, but there's a lot we can do, and I will do.
Vice President Biden, thank you for that answer. Thank you to John Vang Tao for that question as well. We have more questions from the community. I'm going to hand it over now to my colleague, Vicki.
Thanks so much, Amna. Let me just go ahead and start my video here. We're doing a lot of our own. There you are. Hi, how are you, Vice President Biden?
How are you?
Beautiful where you are.
I'm in my back porch. I tell you what, did you ever think we'd be doing this from home?
I did not. It is the strangest time. And I must say, as strange as it is to be a journalist right now, it must be even more difficult and odd to be campaigning in the time of a pandemic when for months we've all been told to stay home.
That's right.
Yes, that has not stopped your opponent, though. President Trump has been holding rallies, events. We haven't seen much of you, Vice President Biden. Americans have not seen you. So as you try to convince voters to cast their ballots for you, what do you say to the silent majority who see you as an extension of President Obama, representing a time when many felt like they weren't heard, they weren't seen, people who feel like this country is trending too far left? And I have one more part to this question I want to ask you. In your first 100 days as president, what will you do to create a pathway to citizenship for many undocumented immigrants? That is a big issue for the AAPI community. As you know, 1.7 million face deportation threats. Another 100,000 are young people who are affected by the DACA program. So 2 parts for you. What are you going to do to be more visible? And what do you say to the folks that think you're just going to be President Obama 2.0? And what are you going to do about immigration right when you get in office?
Look, I am very proud to serve with Barack, and it's one of the great honors of my life. I thought he was a great president, but even he acknowledges we can't go back to what it was. We have to go back and build back better. And so I have a program that is significantly different and builds upon where we left off and tries to undo the damage that Trump has done, number one. Number two, I'm campaigning from home about Biden hiding in his cellar. Well, the truth of the matter is over 200 million people have watched me on television, and they've watched, and the more that Donald Trump is out, the worse he does. I think it's wonderful he goes out. I'm being a bit facetious because it's dangerous what he's doing with these rallies. But look at his numbers have dropped through the floor. They've dropped through the floor, number one. Number two, I've gone out responsibly. I go out and I wear this mask when I go out. And when I go out, I keep social distancing. I went to Texas to be with the Floyd family for the funeral. I went up to Pennsylvania, Lancaster yesterday to meet with a group, day before yesterday, to meet with a group of people who in fact have Obamacare being ripped out from under them, and they have pre-existing conditions in their families. I've been down to Virginia. I've been around the country, but I do it responsibly, and I don't hold rallies because it is the reason why we're in such trouble by not listening to the experts and the scientists about social distancing and wearing masks, which I never do when I walk outside of this house. I never fail to do. Now, one day, on day one, I'm going to send the legislative immigration reform bill to Congress to provide a roadmap to citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants who contribute so much to this country, including 1.7 million AAPI. My immigration policy is built around keeping families together, modernizing the immigration system by keeping families, unification, and diversity as pillars of our immigration system, which it used to be. Ending Trump's cruel and inhumane policy at the border to rip children from their mother's arms. Take immediate action to protect dreamers, including the more than 100,000 100,000 eligible dreamers from East and South Asia, rescinding the un-American Muslim ban immediately, restoring refugee admission in line with the values and historic leadership of our country, raising the target to a minimum of 125,000 people a year in my first year. He's cut it down to 15. The average has been 95,000 a year. Working with Congress to establish a bipartisan legislation to ensure a minimum admission of 95,000 refugees. That's who we are. That's how my great-great-grandfather, four greats back got here. He got in a coffin ship on the Irish Sea, never knowing whether he was going to make it. And he made it to the United States of America in 1848 when the British were, anyway. So streamlining naturalization process, make it easier for qualified green card holders to move through his backlog. And by the way, he just indicated he ended H-1B visas the rest of this year. That will not be in my administration. The people on the coming visas have built this country. And so you asked other parts of a question. I can't remember what other ones were. One was what I'm going to do about immigration. What was the other part? Is that it?
Jump back in. Can you hear me at least? I know you
can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, it was what will you do specifically in that first 100 days when it comes to immigration?
Well, to send that, I have a bill written already to send it directly to the Congress. Day one.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Vice President Biden, we are going to ask one of our community members next to ask you a question. Her name is Vimala Rajendran. She is going to come to us from Zoom from North Carolina. She's a chef and a small business owner. Go ahead, Vimala.
I don't see anybody on this.
Oh, hang on. Here she is. Hang on. She's going to unmute herself.
Okay.
There you go. Vimala, go for it.
Hello, my name is Vimala Rajendran. As Vicky just said, I have lived in the United States for 40 years and just got naturalized as a citizen in 2019. 2020 will be my first.
Thanks for choosing the United States. Thanks for choosing us.
Thank you. And I feel so much at home here because civic engagement has always been my calling. And I accidentally became a chef because of circumstances, not having immigration papers to do other professional work, which was in media and education. I became a chef 10 years ago, and I saw the American dream be fulfilled in front of me with becoming a successful award-winning chef and restaurant in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So my representative, Congressman David Price, has worked very closely with me to welcome refugees from about 19 countries right here at my restaurant and say hello and welcome home. So what we have done since COVID-19 as a small business is to reach out and continue our work to feed the hungry, even though we are a for-profit business, a triple bottom line business that has believed in people, planet, and profit. And I must say that getting into business as an Asian American woman has been really hard. Finding the capital was hard. Getting PPP right now during COVID-19 was extremely difficult. Major corporations got millions before we got our $100,000, which we have to spend within 24 weeks, I may add. I must ask you, Vice President Joe Biden, what would you do to help us rebuild the economy so that small businesses that are family owned and that are enriching the local economy, building the new South? Because as you know, as the South goes, so goes the nation. What are we going to do? What will we do? What can I do to rebuild the economy as we go back into post-COVID days?
Well, first of all, when they came up with the CARES Act, the $2 trillion that was supposed to be distributed, I pointed out that it was likely to be what I call the Trump corrupt recovery. 40% of the money that was supposed to go to small businesses did not go to small businesses. It went to large businesses. They don't need the help. They're not the ones that needed the help. And there's also the Main Street proposal that had several billions of dollars in it. Not one single penny has been distributed so far. And I suggested in the very beginning that there be a proposal that the president initiate the Defense Production Act to insist that they watch the major banks to make sure they would distribute monies that didn't cost them at all. They're covered. That distribute those monies to small businesses, which are the backbone and employ more people than the major businesses do, the big businesses. But guess what happened? The fact is that it didn't happen. They did not get it. Those big banks don't like lending money. So if you went to a big bank to get your access to the stimulus that was provided, they'd say, do you have an account here? What is your credit standing? Do you have a credit card with us, et cetera? That's not supposed to be how it worked. And in addition, you may recall, the president then fired the oversight board, the individual, a person who is supposed to watch and see how each of these dollars is expended, and to make sure that this administrator would look and make sure the program was working. He fired them. There is no inspector general that was supposed to be there. First thing I'll do as president is appoint an inspector general to go back and look where every single penny of the money got distributed and hold those accountable where there is violation of the rule and or there has been any chicanery. A lot of that money has gone to the big businesses that didn't need it and didn't get to where it's supposed to be. And with regard to PPP, with everything from masks all the way to making sure that you're able to open in ways that are safe and or keep your workforce safe. That is ridiculous that it's not been available to you. And it's ridiculous that the president has been AWOL. He says, I take no responsibility. That's a state responsibility. This is a war he talks about, a war against this virus. Yet he's AWOL. He does not take any responsibility. He's leaving it to the states. Second part of what you're saying, to make sure we meet the diverse needs of this community are met in administration stimulus program, designing jobs programs, and helping businesses get ahead. Because small businesses are the key to our recovery. You're the foundation of the community, of this country, of the American dream. And they're bearing the brunt, and you're bearing the brunt of the economic crisis today, including Asian American community. Now, look, Trump's corrupt recovery is focused on the wealthy, well-connected, not the millions of mom and pops that are out there facing ruin. As I said earlier, 40% of the funds didn't go to small businesses at all. And the Main Street lending program has lent not a single dollar. Because many of the AAPI-owned businesses are cash operated and don't have ties to banks, they're hard to find time accessing this paycheck protection program, funds that Trump is supposed to be supplying through the administration, through what the Congress passed. But here's what I'll do for small businesses now: provide clear, consistent guidelines for safe reopening, get the workers free testing and PPE to stay safe, provide an ambitious restart package to help small businesses not only be able to reopen, but rehire workers and cover the extra restart expenses and fixed costs like rent. Make sure that stimulus funds are distributed fairly. As I said, I'm going to appoint an inspector general on day one to make sure the funds actually get where they're supposed to go. Reverse half of the new PPP funds for small businesses with less than 50 employees, so that right now, small businesses is technically under 500 employees. Well, that's not what most people think is a small business. Half those funds should go to people with less than 50 employees and even smaller. We have to focus on, you have been the heartbeat of your community and of a community and the communities across the country. And the other thing is that you're working with Congressman Price, who's a first-rate guy. We, in fact, have to increase the numbers, as I said earlier, of refugees able to come to the United States of America. I'm
going to stop you right there. Just so you get time for another community question. That was great. We appreciate what you had to say about small businesses. I'm going to toss it to Melissa Leylon. She is coming in with a question about healthcare.
AAPIs, including COFAs, are among the most visible of healthcare workers caring for COVID-19 patients. Pacific Islanders are contracting and dying from the virus at an alarming rate. only to be largely forgotten in discussions of community impact. COVID-19 has raised onto a pedestal health disparity for people of color, including AAPIs. Yet access to healthcare insurance is one of the biggest barriers our communities face due to language and policy barriers. 1/3 of Asian Americans have limited English skills. What are your plans to ensure that all AAPIs can obtain health coverage with language assistance in your administration?
Free for everyone, exponentially surge the testing to make sure it reaches the community, get critical medical supplies and care hospitals in every part of this nation. And I'd immediately drop Trump's efforts to overturn Obamacare and strip millions of health care, even during this pandemic. He shouldn't be putting politics again, his politics ahead of the safety of the American people. And one of the things you all know better than any group is that Obamacare and is still a big deal. It covered 20 million uninsured, 2 million formerly uninsured AAPIs. As president, I'm going to build on it with a public option, slashing premiums and deductions and drug costs, automatically enrolling people who are eligible for Medicaid but live in states that reject this expansion, double the funding for community health care centers and frontline care, and I'll work to tear down the language barriers to keep AAP from quality care. For example, during our administration, we distributed health insurance information in 7 Asian languages: Burmese, Chinese, Hmong, Khmer, and Vietnamese, and Lao. And so, as president, I'm going to build on that important work and direct federal agencies to find new ways to increase access to federal programs for the AAP community, including those with limited English proficiency, to ensure that the best practices are shared across departments and agencies. Now, look, that includes making sure the AAPI communities has access to information about COVID-19. So far, the Center for Disease Control materials have been translated into Spanish, Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, but other resources like those released by the White House Coronavirus Task Force and other federal agencies are available only in English and Spanish. You all know the argument that most people don't about, the model minority. Well, AAP advocates across the country know that there is a section of the AA. If you take it as one big group, it has the highest education achievement, etc. But what we insisted was that we for example, at the Department of Education, integrated post and secondary education data system, it should be broken down by ethnicity because it changes dramatically. This administration hadn't done that. HHS has 7 Asian Americans and 4 Pacific Islander breakdown in categories. Department of Labor has done the same thing. This guy's not done that at all. So you look out and generically you say, okay, the AAPI community writ large has a great achievement higher than any other group in America. But that misrepresents the fact that scores of ethnicities are in fact really being hurt and left behind. And we're supposed to be breaking that out so we know exactly where they are so they can be taken care of and treated fairly. That's one of the priorities I will have in addition to access to eliminating the language barrier. I went really quickly because I know we're getting out of time. I apologize.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Vice President Biden, I just want to say, day one, you said you will have an immigration plan.
Yes.
You managed to use the word chicanery, and you are going to make your diversity data public right after this town hall. We're looking forward to it because, as we've been saying, representation certainly matters in all facets of life, private and public. We appreciate very much your time today.
And we're going to continue. By the way, this isn't the end of the diversity. This is just the beginning. And I said, the administration will look like it. So thank you very much.
他们是一群前线英雄，而你可以用一个小举动来报答他们。就是完成2020年人口普查，这些数据可以帮助社区规划并分配资金给全国各地的医院。 诊所和紧急服务。准确计算可以帮助公共卫生局确认所需资源，以保护我们的社区。立即上2020 census.gov 填好问卷，开展我们的未来。即刻上2020 census.gov/languages 回复人口普查。